For those of you who don't know me, haven't met before, my name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. Been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and lots of changes in recent years with the LSAT-Flex and even a lot of law schools moving online. So I thought it would be fun to have a conversation about the LSAT-Flex changes, along with Professor Reese of JD Navigator. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Steve. I'm really glad to be here with you. I'm a lawyer, entrepreneur, and a law professor. I teach business law courses at Mitchell-Hamlin School of Law as a visiting professor there. And I'm also the founder of JD Navigator, which is an online course and site to help people determine whether law school is right for them. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about in what circumstances law school might be right for someone in the pandemic situation.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I'm sure folks will be very interested to hear more about that, especially with all the recent changes to law school and to society during this unique time. So I thought it might be fun for us to talk about all the changes, both with the LSAT and with law school. So I'm happy to share some thoughts on the LSAT-Flex side of things.
Yeah. So what are you seeing on the LSAT-Flex? I mean, I've read a little bit about it. It's shorter. It's home. How did the first one go?
Yeah, so the first one had a few issues with the tech, which is to be expected. The first administration, it was administered by a company called ProctorU, which administers a number of other online exams as well. But I think there were too many people in the system at once, and not all the proctors knew all of the rules. So there was some confusion around that. So I definitely feel for anybody who was the guinea pig in that May LSAT-Flex administration. I'm very hopeful that the June LSAT-Flex will go more smoothly with all of these lessons learned. I've put together some cheat sheets around that, just summarizing it, and I'll share that with everybody afterwards. But basically, it's important to know the rules, know your rights, correct the proctors if they make a mistake. And the next June LSAT-Flex is just a week or so away.
Mm-hmm. Are you advising people to study any differently for the LSAT-Flex than for the regular LSAT?
I am a little bit. I think that obviously the content of the exam has not changed at all. Just with the Flex, it's going to be 3 sections, not 5 with 4 scored. So logical reasoning matters a little bit less, and logic, aims, and reading comprehension matter a little bit more. So you may want to adjust the ratios in which you study those different sections. But that's really the biggest change of all with the Flex, other than the setting where you're doing it at home online versus in person on a tablet. So prepare like it's going to be game day. We know June obviously is a Flex, which is just a week away. The July LSAT will also be a Flex. So anybody taking those, you know what you're getting. August is the open question.
Sure. I mean, none of us have any idea kind of the world that we're headed into. Our school's going to be able to be in person. Our event's going to be able to be in person. We all have to be very flexible.
Yeah, that's what LSAC's trying to do, really. They're delaying decisions on this as long as possible, because I think they really want to do it in person. I would imagine just as law schools really want to hold their fall semester in person, so they're delaying making a decision on that. But you don't really know what it's going to be. So, and people have to make decisions on their end too, right? You have to know which format are you preparing for, just like you want to know, are you renting an apartment in the city where the law school is located, right?
Right. Yeah, and I really feel for the people who are graduating law school and normally would be taking the bar exam in July, because a number of the states are still debating what they're going to do with the bar exam. Only a few states have chosen to go online. It's a complicated picture.
Yeah, and online exams, it's definitely a different experience. You end up with issues of people having access to the appropriate devices, people having a good internet connection. And as far as the LSAT-Flex is concerned, if you don't have a good device or a good connection, you can reach out to LSAC and they'll provide you a loaner device, or they'll give you a credit. They'll reimburse you if you have to go to a hotel to take it, for example. They'll reimburse you for $125.
I thought that was a great idea on their part, because we definitely know that some people don't have good internet access and or don't have good quiet places to do these kind of tests. So I appreciated seeing that LSAC is understanding that.
Yeah,
I think that was a little bit of a wake-up call for law faculty as well, to realize how much our students depended on the law building as the place that they studied.
Yeah, it's true.
To lose that was complicated.
Yeah, it's true. And at home, your internet can be shaky sometimes. And I think the biggest thing for students taking the Flex is make a decision as earlier rather than later about whether your home environment is going to be suitable or not. Like, can you rely on whoever you live with to be quiet for those 2 hours? And can you rely on your internet to be strong enough during that period? Because if you think it's going to be okay or likely okay, but then test day rolls around and it doesn't work, nothing you can do at that point. You're going to have to ask for a refund or ask for a credit for a future testing date, and you don't want that chaos. So if there's any, to me, in my view, if there's any doubt about it, just ask them to help you out. Ask for a different device or ask them for a place to take it, because at least that way you can maximize the odds of it being good, even if you do have to travel somewhere a short distance, I hope, to go to a hotel to take it there.
Right. And indeed, people have done that for the bar exam for years. I spend the night in a hotel before the bar to make sure that they get sleep away from their little ones or whatever.
Yeah, I've heard the same for the LSAT as well. People actually traveling just to find a good testing center sometimes.
Well, that's true too. Yeah, people don't necessarily live in a big metro area that offers one. So now we all can and have to do it from the comfort of our homes.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Exactly. So I'm really curious to hear about your experience with this online conference that you attended last week. You told me that you were learning about law schools going online and online education. So I'm curious about your biggest insights or takeaways from that experience. What was that like?
It was a great conference. It was put on by an organization called about if they're just applying to law school. But Callie is an advocate. I'm sorry, I'm having connection problems. Okay, there we go. Callie is an advocate of using technology in law schools and has been for a long time. And so they are excited to help law faculty build the skills that they need in order to be effective online educators, which is a new activity for most law faculty. There are some schools that have online programs, including mine at Mitchell-Hamlin, but many law faculty were thrust into teaching online with very little preparation or training this spring. So here's Callie stepping into the breach, trying to explore how do you have an online conference and how do you teach people to teach online. So it was a great conference. It was fun to try to find different ways to participate with people. They encouraged us to, for instance, set up one-on-one Zoom sessions with people as if we were meeting in the hallway after a conference and so forth. But I think one of the things, back to your question, that really came out of that conference was we just don't know what the fall is going to look like. And so administrators are trying to get their hands around, do they have to go online? Do they want to say they're going to be in person until they have to, make a call? And so forth. And so we're seeing different law schools make really different decisions. It was just about a week ago, Harvard Law School came out and said they were going to be entirely online in the fall, which I think is nice because it gives us a sense of certainty to the students and to the faculty. Now they can prepare to, from the faculty side, for instance, to give the very best online education that they can. In other schools, the faculty is trying to kind of dual track what we are, just not knowing exactly what we're going to be asked to do.
So here's a question about that. So Harvard Law, they make that decision last week, and it definitely made some waves, of course, because Harvard does anything, it makes waves. But Harvard can go entirely online and not lose a single student. From an enrollment perspective, they've got the brand, they've got the credibility that people are going to go to Harvard Law regardless. Other law schools, if they were to go entirely online, might they not lose some students who want to hold off and not pay the same tuition for that experience?
Yeah, I wonder about that too. And not even from tuition, but you see students say, I really want to be in person. I want to go somewhere that I can be in person. And in some sense, on some sense, I really respect that. On the other, I think it's natural human nature to wish that the pandemic wouldn't have, obviously, but that's not all. Unfortunately, we are going to be subject to various social distancing things. Schools are talking about, for instance, only having half the class come on Tuesdays and the other half come on Thursdays, and then you have to watch online, the other half so that they can have people spaced out in the classrooms. It's going to be different than it was last year, even for those who try to be in person.
Right. And you mentioned that idea of simulating running into somebody in a hallway by having a one-on-one Zoom meeting. How might that play out in a law school setting?
Mm-hmm. I really like teaching online, and I have a lot of one-on-one contact with my students, either by telephone or Zoom. It's easy enough to have office hours that people can drop in, to have scheduled face-to-face time, as well as obviously having synchronous class on Zoom. It's not a perfect solution, but I believe that online education is a good substitute for most of the things that you usually do in law school. Some is lost, but also some is gained. For instance, we're now preparing law students to go be lawyers who are going into a world where they have to, for instance, do online depositions and online arguments before a court. So the new crop of law students is going to be exposed to those kind of challenges just as part of their legal training.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That everyone's got to get comfortable with doing stuff online. And I expect that even though a lot of these things like online depositions are uniquely because of the pandemic, and we may see a lot of that return to in-person when it's possible. But
I don't think
you don't think so? You don't think we're going to go back?
Because for clients, a lot of the cost of depositions is flying your attorney to Omaha or whatever. If you can cut out all of that travel time cost and get basically the same result, clients aren't going to be willing to pay their lawyers to travel anymore.
Okay, so the lawyers might not travel, but what about the clients themselves?
Well, usually lawyers are traveling to clients to do the depositions, or are traveling to courts in order to do court appearances. So you hear like lawyers in Texas, for instance, have to travel long distances to appear at these rural courts for even small motions. Now those rural courts are now finally getting online. And that's going to make so much more sense to continue to do that in the future. It's going to save a lot of client money for all those lawyers driving there and make courts more accessible, which is really the point, right? Is we want to maximize access to justice.
Absolutely.
We're talking about sort of the practice of law in a pandemic. I should probably pull it back a little bit to legal education or to choosing legal education. It's
remarkable though how these courts that are so resistant to technology have been forced to do it, and sometimes even going farther than they needed to, like the Supreme Court becoming more open and accessible to the public in this way when it never was before. Been really good. I know a lot of pre-law students have been clued into listening to that stuff just to hear it firsthand when it was never possible before. But yeah, to bring it back to the law school context, I was actually talking with an entering 1L right before this conversation, and she was saying how she's concerned that law school study groups, like of course, law school itself, people talk about the Zoom school of law where everything's online through Zoom, and the professors have the paid Zoom accounts like what we're using now to be able to hold a large group meeting. That's more than 40 minutes, theoretically, when free Zoom accounts can't do that. So not every law student's going to go get a paid Zoom account to have all the features. How are law students going to run study groups of more than 2 people? Have they talked about that at all?
I'm not concerned about study groups at all. You can just tie 40 minutes together. You can, I bet that some law schools will include students in their Zoom subscription. And I bet there are lots of other great tech minds coming up with all sorts of other solutions about how we can be virtually in person. I've actually heard of people like meeting in video games and doing other activities. So, the study group experience, might be via Zoom, but it can totally continue. And actually being able to share a screen or share a Google document in real time is the kind of use of technology that is enhanced when we use Zoom. So So I'm not concerned about that at all. I'm sorry, I lost the track of the other half of the question that you asked.
No, it's okay. I think I was really just focused on the law student experience, being online, talking about study groups and in general, socializing. I'm concerned about like the random things like the person sitting next to you in class and facilitating connections between students, not really happening when you're in an online setting where it's professor and students, and the student might ask a question to the professor, but students aren't going to be joking with each other in the same way where law school is like high school and you actually have that going on.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So let me make 2 points about that. One is, so Mitchell Hamlin has what we call the blended program, where it's a mostly online program. We launched this 5 years ago, I guess. So we're the only school that has actually graduated students and had them pass the bar through this mostly online program. So one of the points that I want to make about that is that the bonds that those students form with one another are more intense than the bonds that I see between my students who are in sort of my regular law school class. They form Facebook groups, they are texting the people that they're closest to, even though they live in all different states, those bonds, even without actually being in the same airspace. The other one, though, is that we maybe do have to be more intentional about both forming those bonds and just being part of the classroom community. One of the risks of being an online learner is that it's easier to just sort of drop out and not pay attention, right? As a teacher, I think of it as like, I can't necessarily look at you and see that you're sleeping or, not nodding along, whatever. And so in some sense, online law students need to step up to the plate and even more than your regular law student does. Like when I talk about law student success, I say you've got to not just receive what you're given, but actually seize the opportunity, look for where you fit in the profession, ask to meet with people, engage with the material, right? That kind of active learning comes from both the professor and from the student.
That's a fair point. I could definitely see it requiring more of the student to stay engaged when they're not on a campus with anybody, they're not in the building with everybody, they're not commuting at all. So it requires more intentionality to really block it out and make it a priority. And so I'm wondering, this could tie into our discussion around deciding whether to go to law school in general, but specifically deciding to go online versus potentially holding off and going only if it were to be in person. Are there other factors that a student might want to consider when going online versus in person?
Yeah, as we think about the deferral question, I guess one of the pieces of advice I've been giving people is, if you deferred, what would you be doing with that year of your life instead? Like, if they have a good job that they are in the middle of and are going to continue to earn money for their family, that's maybe a different point than if they don't have that. They just graduated from college and in fact, employment, unemployment being so high, it's not necessarily going to be a year of a lot of earning or learning. It might make more sense to go ahead and start in law school and move towards that JD so that you can get back out on the job market with that credential. So, okay, so there's opportunity cost issues in deferral. Can you hear me? You froze on me.
Yeah, I could hear you.
Did I freeze? Okay, great. Sorry. I think one of the other interesting dynamics about deferral is, to the extent that other people defer, then the law students who are going this year are going to have a greater advantage, right? Because they're going to be part of a smaller crop of lawyers that will be graduating into the market at the end of their, succession through law school. And to the extent that they're competing for limited merit scholarship dollars, based on their LSAT scores, then they could potentially be more successful in getting those big scholarships that help them not go into significant debt in order to get that JD. So I think there's some real benefits of not deferring. Back to your core question though, I think if people really feel like they can't be successful online students, then that's a really smart thing to know about yourself. And you want to try to put yourself into a circumstance where you think that you'll be successful. But I would challenge students, I think, many of us had a bad experience, the teachers who were thrust into it quickly. But I have hopes that this fall it's going to be more organized, better trained, more thoughtful. And so more from the professor, more from the student, we may be able to get it done.
Yeah. And I think it's cool that the school that you teach at, Mitchell-Hamlin, that they actually have a lot of experience with this, because you can really see what it looks like to have law school online when you're not figuring it out on the fly like all schools were in spring semester 2020. I think fall semester will be a relatively better experience. And then let's say, fingers crossed, this doesn't happen, but what if there are second and third waves of coronavirus, and even a long time, even like a year from now, it were still an issue in some circumstances. If they had to be online, they might know how to handle it much better. But I like that you called out the pros and cons, because I think that on the one hand, we could say the online experience might not be as good. On the other hand, there could be ways in which it's more convenient and better for the student who's much more engaged and driven and willing to forego having a real high school-like experience in a tight-knit community on campus, especially if you have family obligations or tied geographically to one location for some other reason as well, like going to school part-time potentially. But as you also said, next cycle, for those who are applying this fall to start in fall 2021, as I know many of my students are, if not all of them, it's going to be more competitive, because like in many recessions, people look to wait it out by going to law school. So I do think that given lower opportunity cost with fewer career options, fewer job options, especially if you graduated in this past May of 2020, what else are you going to be doing, right? So I think that for many students, they would want to go now if they could, but if not, hey, either way, as we said, earlier in our conversation, like getting a higher LSAT score, regardless, can only improve your options.
Well, that's exactly right. Yes. And I would encourage people to use that high LSAT score to try to get scholarship money that then gives them flexibility for the career that they choose on the back end. So just to break that down a little more, when people go to the very best school that they can get into, then they're borrowing a great deal of money in order to do that. And so at the back of their, after graduation, they have this enormous debt load that they need to then get, a real job, right? Hopefully a big firm job in order to be able to pay down that debt. So people whose heart is really in public interest law, in civil rights, and litigation, in immigration, etc., those jobs are terrific and really important for our society, and they also don't pay well. And so to the extent that you can graduate from law school with that JD, but without all that crippling debt, then that opens up those career choices a great deal further. So that's why I went to not as highly ranked of a law school on a scholarship, and I would do it again.
No, it's a good point. I'm glad you raised that, the rankings and that whole question, because a lot of people do have the idea of T14 or bust, go to the top 14 law schools, the best ones possible, the biggest names. And in some cases, for some careers, that might be the right choice. But for many other cases, many other careers, especially public interest, I think that if you want to keep your options open and potentially take a lower paying but more satisfying job, or simply not have to take the job that pays the most, going to a law school that has a lower ranking, maybe not as much prestige, but allows you to graduate with little to no debt, where you can get big merit scholarships by applying with a high LSAT score or GPA above the median of that school. That might be the better option in the long run. I think there's a lot to be said for graduating with little to no debt. especially if you have
That's right.
especially if you have college debt on top of that.
Well, that's true. That's right. And then if you marry somebody with debts, like I did, so. But that's why I started JD Navigator, because I was seeing all of these people go to law school with good plans about how they were going to help people, and then suddenly realize during law school that the career that they would find fulfilling wasn't a career that they could afford to have. And that very few of these big firm jobs exist, and most people don't make that kind of money. So it's important to have kind of the whole picture of, what you would do with your JD and how you get there, so that you can make a reasoned decision up front. So that's why I launched this this online course that I call JD Navigator, to help people think through that decision in total before they plunk down all of that money.
Well, that's awesome. I think it's a valuable resource that you put together just to help people think through all the different factors, because it's a big decision to go to law school at all, and then to choose where to go after that, to weigh ranking versus scholarships, for example, and graduating without debt. So I'm wondering, especially given current situation with the pandemic, what are some of the other factors people should be thinking about when they're choosing which schools should be on their short list, and breaking down, reach versus target versus safety? Do you think of things in that way? What's most useful in putting together that list of schools to apply to?
In the pandemic context, I think you've got some extra questions about what is your plan for the fall, or for, when you would come, right? What kind of steps are you taking to keep us safe if you say that you're going to have in-person classes? What kind of experience and training now have you had in teaching online? And what are your contingency plans in case of a second wave? I would ask schools that. And if they say basically, we don't believe there's going to be a second wave, or we're not concerned about your safety, then that's some pretty important information that you have gleaned. Absent the pandemic context, I would definitely, as we thought about a little bit in the bar exam context, lawyers are still regulated state by state. It's very 19th century. And so it is common that the law school that you go to is going to help you get connections, clerkships, etc., in the community in which the law school is, that then are the, contacts and jobs that you need in order to get that first real job out of law school. And therefore, that's the state bar that you sit for. And then you're trapped into staying in that state for maybe forever, or for 7 years until you can waive into another state. So you might not be realizing that the law school decision is in some sense a decision about where you want to live in your early adult life. I certainly didn't understand that. Now people do change geography. Like I had some friends who knew they were always going to go back to Colorado. As soon as we graduated, they moved back. They took the Colorado bar. They practiced in Colorado. But that was the exception rather than the norm. And it was a little harder for them to get summer jobs in Colorado from being in law school in Minnesota, et cetera.
Yeah, so geography definitely plays a role there. With coronavirus, if things are online, maybe geography doesn't matter as much. I'm wondering, when it comes to post-graduation and networking, how does that work if you're online? You're not in the same geography. Is it just about going through LinkedIn?
Right. Well, and it's funny because I agree that geography isn't that important, shouldn't be that important in our digital age. But lawyers are still regulated by state. So at some point, you're still going to have to figure out what state bar you're going to sit for and what state you're going to be, allowed to practice in. Again, it doesn't fit very well with kind of our digital world. Networking online, I think, is harder. I think we're still learning about what that looks like. In these early days of the pandemic, like basically bar association activities and stuff just stopped. So at some point, we're going to have to try to figure out how to restart that, how that looks. Again, I really respect that Callie went ahead and just gave it a shot. What can an online conference look like? And hopefully we'll get better at that. Yeah. At this point, like LinkedIn and Twitter are important ways for people at least to be communicating about what they're doing, what they're thinking about, and connecting with one another.
Yeah. It was nice to see that they put that together so quickly as well. Now, I'm wondering, one question I've been getting from a lot of students in my courses is around the idea of pursuing public interest law, specifically those who are feeling affected by or connected to things around Black Lives Matter, recent protests, police brutality. And I'm wondering if you can speak at all to like how student perceptions of criminal defense law, for example, or criminal justice law might differ from the reality of that practice. If you have any personal experience with that area of law, or you could speak to what that actually looks like. And folks can feel free to ask questions too.
Yeah. I think it's tough because there just are not that many like jobs that you can go to an employer and apply for in those kind of civil rights, social justice kind of jobs. And if there are, they don't pay very well. Like the ACLU and the NAACP and others do employ lawyers, but not very many. And certainly not at the kind of rates that we see from, say, Sullivan and Cromwell and the big New York firms. Okay. So it is a common thing that people go to law school excited to change the world. And my hope is that people will find a fit in the profession and a way to give back and be a part of helping the community move forward, even if they are not, one of those couple lawyers who are actually in those jobs. But it might be somewhat disappointing for students.
That is disappointing, honestly. I feel like a lot of students, and they can feel free to chime in, like I would imagine, I have a question here from Markeisha in the chat saying, let's say that pay is not the driving factor. How would you select a firm or organization that's rooted in change? What about the people who don't just want to spend 10% or 5% of their hours on pro bono, but they really want to be all in on this, even if it means they're getting paid a much lower salary? What do they do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are good organizations out there, and my hope is that there are going to continue to be more, right? I have seen, it has been exciting to see the many ways that lawyers are stepping up, both now in this moment about racial justice, as well as on immigration issues and voting issues and so forth. And one of the ways that philanthropists are helping organizations is by funding, attorney positions. So the people that get out of law school, with that fire in their belly, there is another not great paid job to do that important work. So I don't know that I would point you to any specific organizations at this point. But the other thing I can tell you is that the law schools do a great job of helping connect people to those opportunities, because it's a way for, legal aid clinics. And, we have a thing in Minnesota called the Minnesota Justice Foundation, which works with a lot of nonprofits that are doing really good work and helps law students go out there and, work directly with, for instance, tenants who are exercising rights that they have under Minnesota law and might not know that they have those rights and, need some help with that. So that's really good training for the law students, and it's very fulfilling and important.
That's awesome to hear. Now, with regard to getting questions from Jasmine about legal aid clinics, and how might legal aid clinics move online? Has there been discussion around what that simulation could look like to let students get the legal aid clinic experience, even if nothing's happening in person?
I have seen I have seen the professor who runs our clinics at Mitchell Hamlin just totally rocking and rolling on getting that online. I mean, certainly the need is greater than it was before, And so to the extent that we can set up the tech tools that we need in order to help those people in a socially distanced way, like she's all about it. So I think I think that's going to be done, that's going to get done and be exciting. Looking at the chat here, sorry, I'm frowning at my screen. Let's see.
Well, I guess the next question was a follow-up around, let's say that a student is passionate about criminal justice reform, around social justice, and they want to get some experience now before going to law school, get some exposure, maybe build their resumes, get some material for a personal statement, or just to dive into that world before making the law school decision. I know that you're all about making the law school decision and doing the research first. So if someone's interested in exploring that, how could they do that as a pre-law student before even applying? Is there volunteer work or internships or a way to just get involved that you know of? I know that you weren't talking about specific organizations maybe, but what kind of exploration could a student do?
Yeah, again, I'm not sure that I'm the perfect person to answer that, but I would guess that there are ways to get involved and follow the work of lawyer organizations that are doing some of this work. Like I know I'm on the email list for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, for instance. And so getting connected with them, trying to see what they might be doing in the area, maybe they need some volunteer help or event planning help or something like that. That might be a cool way to get to know lawyers in your area who are also passionate about those issues. I think that's a great idea. I personally read a biography of Thurgood Marshall the summer before I started law school, and that got me really excited about how the law had been used strategically to achieve civil rights gains. But I'm not going to tell you just to read a book because that would be a super lame professor-y thing to do. So I'm not saying that.
I hear you. Now, I know that we're not speaking in your capacity as a professor at the particular law school where you teach, but I'm wondering if you've seen any examples from them or others around getting involved or supporting those in need during the pandemic or during more recent current events where law students are helping out in some way. Do you see examples of that during times like this?
Definitely. And I think most law schools that you would go to, and that would be an interesting question to ask as you look to choose between law schools too, are, what kind of clinic opportunities or other kind of boots on the ground opportunities might you have in order to help people during law school? And I would guess most law schools will have some exciting ones. I know that we had an immigration law clinic that actually went to Texas and was directly helping people avoid family breakup there and deportation, helping people exercise their rights. That was very cool to hear people come back from that and talk about that experience and what they had. And that was just one professor who was connected with a nonprofit down there, and then a group of students that they brought over spring break. So that was their spring break. I guess that was last year. So I would guess that different law schools are going to have various different kind of experiences like that.
Yeah, it's cool. They like to help out there.
Well, it's so important, and it also helps law students understand the law and how we interact with clients, right? It's a specific mindset to be a lawyer because we are helping other people navigate the law. So we are really more guides, sometimes advocates, but other times just helping people understand this really complicated framework that we've had the training to understand and they have not, and that's not in any way their fault. We're just their guide, they're helping them. So it's a different relationship that you have to teach law students how to do.
Right. Well, your law students and lawyers have the training. They are able to navigate the law. Yeah. No, that's fair. We have a question on more the admissions side of things, how you see or what you've heard about law schools taking potentially more applicants or fewer applicants. How are they going to handle enrollment given the pandemic?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned.
Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, well, I would imagine that as we've discussed, and I've heard elsewhere as well, like social distancing measures in person might require them to have half-empty classrooms, and so that half that's not present on campus, they could be online or they could choose not to go. And so I think that, at least my take is that law schools are going to face some difficult enrollment decisions. Like I said, I think Harvard can be 100% online and maintain its entire enrollment. They could potentially even take on more students because there's no physical limitations. But many other law schools without the brand cachet, without the brand name, they may have a tougher time. And so I would imagine that a lot of students may want to defer matriculation for a year. And if they're able to, then those schools may have to dig deeper into the wait list, maybe lower their medians a little bit, or to maintain their medians, they may need to shrink their class sizes. And that could be obviously a financial issue for them because they have their overhead regardless. So I would imagine overall that they may have to admit more students in order to meet the same enrollment goals. But I think every law school will handle it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that it's going to be a more challenging time to get admitted. I think if any, it's a good time to go to law school in the sense of you are a stronger candidate compared to maybe where you would have been 2 years ago.
Yeah, thank you for that much more concise articulation of the idea. I think that overall, entering fall 2020 will be less competitive, and entering fall 2021 will be more competitive than average. And so if you've got your LSAT largely figured out, let's say you're taking it in July or June, July, or August to start in 2020, and you're willing to go online, you might be able to get a little bit more scholarship money and or maybe be able to get into a better law school. Alternatively, if you want to start fall 2021, like many more people will, with a greater odds of being in person, and then I think in that circumstance, it may be a little bit more competitive. But either way, of course, as I always say, despite the uncertainty, a higher LSAT score will help you get more scholarship money and get better outcomes regardless.
Yes, for sure. And the really interesting thing about this is, we can talk about fall 2020 and fall 2021, but the complicated question about what you're going to do with your JD is what's the market for lawyers going to look like 4 years after, 3 years after that. Nobody can tell you that.
Yeah.
So in some sense, it's a leap of faith. And is it time to take this leap of faith, or do you want to do something else first and then reconsider?
Yeah, that's the flip side of it. That's the other point, is the opportunity cost.
I know I graduated from law school. Exactly, right. I graduated from law school just before turn in 2000. Normal year of hiring and summer associate hiring and all that stuff. And the people who went to law school 1 year behind me had a much harder time finding jobs. Again, this just luck on my part.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So what haven't we hit? What haven't we covered? Other factors to consider?
That is a great question. Let me look at my little notes here. Yeah, I guess the other reason that I really started JD Navigator that I would love to just hit again is we talk a lot about how do we get a high LSAT score, where should we go to law school. I encourage everybody to just take a minute and just make sure that being a lawyer is what they want to do. And if you do, then yes, you got to go to law school in order to be a lawyer. You got to go work hard and rock the LSAT in order to go to law school. But all of those are just tools in order to get to this place where you're acting as a lawyer. And so you want to make sure that you understand what lawyers really do, which is varied. And there are lots of different kinds of lawyers also, but really none of them are the same as the people on Suits. Sorry. Or Law and Order. So you want to make sure that you have a good idea of where you might fit into the profession, and that's going to make it worth all that. Because nobody goes to law school for fun. Nobody takes the LSAT for fun. Well, maybe you, Steve. I don't know, but
I would, yeah.
But you do it in the service of those larger goals. So that's why I started JD Navigator, to hopefully help people get that perspective that then theoretically can help them carry through that difficult process, that long road.
Thank you for that. I think that's really important to slow down and take the time to think, why law school? What does it really look like to be a lawyer? And take a moment to slow down and think through that question before going down this entire road. But if it is right for you, then fantastic, because the world definitely needs a lot of great lawyers who are motivated by that passion for justice, but it also has to be balanced by at least a little bit of practicality, given the big investment involved in 3 years and such. So I appreciate your helping walk through some of the practicalities involved. I think it's important as well.
You got it. Yeah, and I would love to offer your listeners here a coupon for my online code. We can post it maybe in the show notes below or whatever. That if people want to take that 2 hours to hear more from me, then they can do so at a reduced cost.
Yeah, sure. Feel free to share whatever details you want, and you can share them now, just speak it out, or you could email me later and I'll include it in the description for this class.
Yeah. So let's do both. How about that?
Yeah. Sure.
So my website is JD Navigator. So chart your own course to a legal career. So jdnavigator.com. You'll find various free resources there, and then also click for an online course. And then when you go through the online course, I'll set up a coupon code called LSAT Unplugged. So you can take the course for just $99.
Cool. All right. Thank you for that. I'll jot that down. I'll include it in the description inside the course and everything. So yeah, thank you for that, Jen. Really appreciate your taking the time and sharing your insights with everybody. It's been a fun conversation.
It has been. Thank you. Yeah. Best wishes to you, Steve, and also to everybody watching. The world needs more great lawyers. I'm excited to see what you guys choose to do.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Jen, and thanks to everyone for joining and for asking such great questions. I think they were really important issues raised. And yeah, thanks. Thanks for joining, everyone. Take care. See you all soon. Bye. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.